from a resilience point of view, I think many of the risks associated with AI aren't actually that new. AI is like the glitter that currently catches the eye. It's very glittery and sparkly, but underneath, it's the same old poop. You know, like that idea of you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter. And I think in some regards, AI is a little bit of the glitter and the sparkle, but some of the corporate stuff that we've seen for years, like over-reliance on technology, poor staff training, flawed data outputs, lack of continuity plans or IT governance, this is not new stuff. I think that the frame for us is around consequence management. Yes, we've got a new speed, we've got a new scale, we've got a new range of delivery Trojan horses, but it's the same consequences that will accrue from inappropriate use because it's the same themes. Although at the moment, if you look on LinkedIn or you listen to anybody talking about there's never been anything like AI. At the moment, everything seems to be out with the bath. If you're not talking about the sparkle and the glitter, I'm dealing in the poop underneath often in crisis and issues, simulations, and so consequentially, there's the same whiff about it, Bruce, if it's not too graphic.
Well, that's where the human judgment comes in, because you've got to be able to apply the sniff test, right?
Yeah.
Does that look and feel right? If it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's probably not a duck.
But in the age of AI, it might not be a duck.
Yeah.
If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but something in the gut tells us that ain't a duck.
Welcome to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, a podcast for anyone trying to make sense of intelligent machines, messy politics, and everything in between. But don't panic. Today I stopped to give a ride to PR expert Gerry McCusker. Gerry McCusker is the driving force behind The Drill, unique software for crisis simulation training. Gerry is, perhaps, Australia's longest established and best regarded operational risk management and reputation advisor. So I'm absolutely delighted that he could join me today on the Hitchhikers podcast. Welcome along, Gerry. How are you?
Yeah, very well, Bruce. Good afternoon to you.
So I noticed a bit of an accent there. So how long have you been out of Scotland for?
Yes, 26 years away from Scotland, yeah. So that's why I sound a little bit Australian now, Bruce.
G'day. Good to see you, Copper. So you are in the PR space. Tell us a little bit about how you got there and what floats your boat in that space.
Yeah, I actually got into public relations almost by accident. I had wanted to be a journalist, probably a sports journalist. And at college, when I was studying back in Glasgow, we used to do industrial secondments. And I heard about a public relations company where they needed a graduate with really good writing skills, some sense of news awareness, but to work in this mythical monster called public relations, PR. And I got a gig with them. I had a gig as an advertising copywriter just before that as well, and worked in the production department of an ad department too. And when I came to Australia on a holiday several years into my career, an integrated consultancy said, that brand of kind of public relations, media relations, but issues mitigation is something that our clients could do with. And my Australian adventure began as well.
Fantastic. So you've heard of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the TV show, I'm sure. What's your favourite memory of that book or TV show?
Well, the thing that kind of still stays to mind that I thought was opposite for our conversation was the concept of don't panic. So I mean, as an issues and crisis management practitioner, I guess that kind of supposed to go with the territory. And so, yeah, it would be that immortal legend of don't panic. Yeah.
So if I'm in an organisation, at what point do I call something a crisis? Like, how would I know the situation I'm in enable me to pull the trigger and say, we've got a crisis? Can you take people through the different levels of things that can go wrong and when I would be in the soup, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I think clearly it's got to be horses for courses. I remember, and I will share one of my favourite quotes about this because it's really come to mind, Bruce. I remember a very high-ranking and fairly high-profile corporate affairs manager in Australia, like a guy who who would be noted and remarked upon in AFR and the Australian, etc. And he said to me, when we were talking about issues, crisis, and direct categorization, he says, I hear people talk about crisis. He goes, and their crisis is Tuesday afternoon for us. So obviously the nature of the organisation is critical to determining whether you're in a crisis or not. The nature of your business or the sector that you're working in is obviously important as well. Prompted to share through recent experience, Bruce, we recently helped to review and represent an organisation's incident to crisis handling plan or response plan. And I think it was known informally as the crisis plan, but it seemed to be trying to be all things to all. And for me, Bruce, if you call a document, it's a crisis management plan, well, that should apply to managing crises. This clutch of documents had a whole bunch of stuff in there that were crisis adjacent, but weren't actually crises. And I think when we looked at the tabularized format that they had set out, it was very dense, it was very complex, and you really would be hard pushed to make a differentiation in which mode the organisation actually was in. So we suggested a way that they could streamline that, and we broke it into three categorizations of incident. And it was important, Bruce, to give a little bit of context for anybody who's watching or listening. It was crisis and incident management plan. So some incidents are not crises, but they do create a set of consequences, and those consequences create inconveniences, or they may create issues which never become crisis. So basically, Bruce, to try and answer your question for us, some of the value that we were able to bring to that organisation was to say, your incident and crisis response plan or management plan is trying to be all things to all people. Let's clarify it and streamline it. And we gave them three categories of risk, threat, resilience events. And for us, Bruce, it's really simple. It's inconvenience, issue, or crisis. So typically for us as well, an inconvenience would be something that could be, the duration would be relatively short. The consequence of pain accruing would be manageable, usually by a single silo or a team of the business. An issue might involve two or more teams having to respond to the issue, which was happening over a longer duration and had a chain of related issues consequences. And yet moving into the crisis phase again it was an all hands on deck. It was continuity and business affecting. It was impacting severely on stakeholders with the inevitable reputation exposure. I'm really not so sure about that as a determining metric anymore, but really that's what we broke it down into, Bruce, and that's kind of like part of our thinking. Is it inconvenience, i.e., it's really manageable. It's not without pain or consequence. Is it an issue, or is it a full-blown crisis? And again, that's to take some of the debate out of other organisations are the ones who say we've got a crisis plan, and this is a little teeny crisis that we're managing, and this is a mid-range crisis that we're managing, and this is, oh my God, we're not prepared. So we're trying to get people out of that idea of everything's a crisis, but if you call it only a crisis management plan and yet you filter every incident through it, I don't know how practical or realistic that is. And as I say, as our learned friend from the aviation sector told me, that crisis is Tuesday afternoon for us. I don't know if that kind of got there.
It does. Well, the threshold of the three different levels, and have you got some stories that could help people understand? I'll give you one to start
Sure.
off with. An AI agent in Europe recently went rogue and wiped out an entire production database and its backups. So that whole business was destroyed within 9 seconds. And the people who were using the service, it was a car rental agency software, so that they couldn't return cars and they couldn't hire cars through the service. So it was a complete stop of BAU, and we had to go to, obviously they would have had well, hopefully, Gerry, you can tell us whether they had a business continuity plan or not. But if you hear something like that, where does that sit in your framework?
Well, again, clearly for me, if there's an incident or a threat arising which derails the ability to perform, function, business, service contracts, meet stakeholder needs, the contracted needs, I would put that into the crisis category because it requires, but it's really interesting that when we think about this idea, Bruce, as well, because there are many organizations who debate on, should we run a crisis sim? And one of the things I've been exploring with a peer of mine is how many organizations are actually running business continuity simulations rather than, if this happened, well, we would activate the business continuity plan. Okay, then no problem. Let's move. Well, hold on. What does activating that look like when other threats are coming in? Does Bruce know what he's doing? Does Gerry know what he's doing? Because we can't understand him half the time. So,
Mm.
so I don't know if you've heard much of organizations running continuity simulations, Bruce, but I think when the case that you talk about, where within 9 seconds, the capacity to actually operate a business, to be in contact with stakeholders, to, if it's car hire, to be able to check cars out, book cars back in, assess them for damage, complete insurance paperwork, issue refunds or charge monies for additional petrol and mileage. If that's all completely kaboosh, I would have to say I think that fits into the crisis category. But then you get other stuff like robo-debt, which refreshed my interest in machine-based cock-ups. And you get something like that, which was a crisis, but it was a very slow burning crisis. It took a long, long time and some fantastic investigative work by some of our peers in the media to really unpick what had been basically a machine-led, maybe not necessarily pure AI, but a machine-led program which really hounded and persecuted some of the least well-off in our society for monies that they allegedly owed, but many didn't, with fatal and suicidal consequences. But it was a very slow burning thing. So I think that one, if you ask me for a case, I would have thought that very quickly was in the issues management situation where, hey, we're getting a heads up that the system's a bit overzealous in profiling. And there are other instances in the world where systems profiling is an overzealous problem at the moment. But then it morphed into this, and when we had the kind of commission into it and the exploration and the expose and the shaming and the sackings and the carpeting, then it's in a pretty big crisis mode, isn't it?
Well, there's another term for what happened with robo-debt in AI governance speak, and that would be cascading harm. So it compounds. Yeah. And so while it's quietly going about creating a huge problem almost in plain sight, but it's not visible to people, if that makes sense. So the other one would be around the same quiet confidence in using these tools like Copilot or Claude or ChatGPT and putting in confidential or private information into those tools. Now, that might be a one-off, but if everybody's doing it every day, eventually you'll see all your private information out there because the LLMs are using that information for training if you haven't set up your LMs properly. And that's another example of cascading harm. One isolated incident of putting some information into a prompt may not be a big deal, but if 1,000 people are doing that every day of the week, then that could be a huge problem down the track for that company.
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. And at a more superficial level, when we're thinking about the cases of where AI has got the potential to create either an inconvenience, an issue, or a crisis, I was tickled, rather, which probably speaks to my poor taste in humour, Bruce, but the one where there was there not a situation where a New Zealand foodstuffs or food manufacturer had an online recipe giver, and some of the ingredients were actually toxins. Some of the ingredients that it was, magicking up or insisting were key to the
And
tasty recipe.
hallucinating.
Yeah, hallucinating.
Yeah.
I was grasping for the term. And
Yeah.
they were actually toxins. I can't remember. I think one was solvent based on behalf of a brand telling people to put a toxin into a food recipe. Well, not everybody who's reading online recipes has the discernment to know that that's not good advice. And therefore the culpability and the accountability points might be part of that longer chain that you and I are kind of cascading harms that you just described to me.
So I'm well versed in Australia's new AI governance standard, and a couple of things you mentioned really came to the top of my mind. So, as you know, this podcast is based on the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance because there's 42 statements, and you'd be pleased to know, Gerry, statement number 33 is to create a business continuity plan for your AI system should it fail. So that's a tick, right? So then if I go to the statement 40, it's also create a decommissioning plan. And statement 41 is the ability to shut down the AI system if you need to. So what can happen, and what we're seeing more and more of, is these systems get to a point where they're technically unsafe. But the good thing about the standard is that if you follow the standard and you do it properly, you will have the ability to shut down that system and revert to a business continuity plan and keep your business going if the worst case happens, if you do end up having a crisis.
Mm.
So how far do you go with your work in crossing over with governance around, if someone's come to you and talked to you about, hey, we've got AI now, we could have a crisis, etc. Where do you start and finish in terms of what they should be doing
I
around
don't.
the governance of that system?
Yeah, again, for me, Bruce, there are other practitioners who are more informed and better versed on things like legislation, the recovery plans than I am at the moment. And I guess I'm going to out myself a little bit here, Bruce, because I think that from a resilience point of view, and I don't think this is flavour of the month to say this, from a resilience point of view, I think many of the risks associated with AI aren't actually that new. And I think in some regards, Bruce, it's like an analogy that we've all heard, and we need to be careful about how we say it, but AI is like the glitter that currently catches the eye. It's very glittery and sparkly, but underneath it's the same old poop. Like that idea of, you can't polish a turtle,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you can roll it in glitter. And I think in some regards, AI is a little bit of the glitter and the sparkle, but some of the corporate poop stuff that we've seen for years, like over reliance on technology, poor staff training, flawed data outputs, lack of continuity plans or IT governance or remedies or pivot points. This is not new stuff, and I'm puzzled. I'm not unaware of why AI seems so seductive, because it's potent and it's quick and it's imaginative and it's all of these great things. But when we think about consequence management, I think that the frame for us is around consequence management. Is yes, we've got a new speed, we've got a new scale, we've got a new range of delivery Trojan horses, but sometimes it's the same consequences that will accrue from inappropriate use. So at the drill, we've run a couple of AI driven simulations, but we're looking at, for us, I guess, in terms of our ethos, we're looking at consequence management because sometimes it's the same themes. Although at the moment, if you look on LinkedIn or you listen to anybody talking about there's never been anything like AI. There has been some stuff like AI. It's certainly turbocharged, but
yeah.
some of the consequences, I think, are comparable to what we faced before. And thus, some of the models and the principles and the practices that seasoned practitioners like you and we've read about this stuff. We've looked at academic studies. We've followed the models. We've seen what works. These still remain valid. But at the moment, everything seems to be out with the bath. If you're not talking about the sparkle and the glitter, I'm dealing in the poop underneath often in crisis and issues simulations. And so consequentially, there's the same whiff about it, Bruce, if it's not too graphic.
Well, that's where the human judgment comes in, because you've got to
Yeah.
be able to apply the sniff test, right?
Yeah.
Does that look and feel right? If it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's probably not a duck.
But in the age of AI, it might not be a duck.
Yeah.
Therefore, therefore, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but something here or something in the gut tells us that ain't a duck.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen this, Bruce. Like in some of my feeds, I'm pretty good at recognizing what looks like I won't use the term slop. I think it's a bit unfair. I'm
Mm.
quick to identify what looks like a bogus picture or a bogus
Mm.
video or I, I think there's something happens for us internally. You've got to be tuned into it, of course. And I think you get that instinct through through years of practice. But we absolutely need that human overlay, because just because it walks like this might be the outtake that people walk away from this chapter is, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it may not be a duck.
Well, I'll put what you just told me in my language. So I've worked for 30 years in organisations, putting in new systems, putting in new processes, fixing data, building databases. What I'm seeing is you've got the messiness in an organisation that's always been there. You'll have poor processes. You'll have data that's all over the place. You'll have aging systems. Now, you come along with a bright, shiny new AI tool and put that over the top. All you will do is amplify what is already there. And if you go to the yeah, go ahead.
Including the flaws,
The
and the
force, yeah. So,
lapses and yeah.
yeah, just to take it back to that rental car software that was wiped out, very fact that an agent, an AI agent, was allowed to delete a database is the first problem. Because that database should be locked down and only certain people can access it who could have the ability to delete it. So that's also a human problem. If somebody was malicious, they could have deleted that database. So the problem was there before the AI come along. And, AI gets an unfair rap sometimes because the AI, all it did was expose a problem that was already there. And we're getting these new Mythos and et cetera cybersecurity tools that can break into businesses much more quickly and easily than a human ever could. So all those tools are doing is exposing the vulnerabilities that are already there. And so if you've got a poor process or poor data, or you've got aging systems and you're trying to use AI with it, that's where we will see some of the big crisis failures coming up in the next few months or years.
Yeah.
Because they're not ready for it. The businesses are just, the foundations are not there to develop AI without consequence,
It's
in your
it
language.
my mind dances around as you relay that tale, and
Yeah,
when saying, AI's get a bad rap because,
yeah,
these new systems that can break in, and what they're gonna do is spot
mm.
and identify. It struck me that was a little bit like us thanking a burglar for breaking into our house and spotting that the thermostat and the central heating wasn't working properly. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah,
it's an unlovable task to say, well, thank you very much for you've spotted that the smoke alarm in the kid's bedroom wasn't working.
mm,
I know you broke in at the house, but I'm really grateful to you for spotting this vulnerability. And it's not, I'm not blind to the fact that AI can deliver all of this kind of capability of making sense of information better, of maybe spotting erroneous content, or making sure that comms messages are completely aligned across multiple channels, or cut up and diversified to give to the right stakeholders at the right time and issue. I mean, there's tremendous programming capabilities there, but I still think in terms, Bruce, for whether you're in you come, and you and I met through the Australian Institute of Company Directors, I
yeah,
remember.
yeah.
Whether you're coming to it from an org structures and governance point of view, which is your speciality, or I come at it from an issues mitigation or a continuity planning or crisis comms POV, we've both got to be focused on consequence management. We've got to focus on what are the pain points arising from the ineptitudes that may arise or could be uncovered. So it's definitely to salute the capabilities of the new tools, but maybe to highlight that the inappropriate or maladaptive deployment of these tools is something that organizations really need. Because you were
Mhm.
talking when we first spoke, you were talking about the new legislation. You mentioned it earlier on. Is that
Mm.
is there going to be is it all carrot, or is there some stick involved in that legislation?
Oh, it's all stick.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so I'll just recap what's happening is in in December, the privacy principles are changing so that automated decision systems will be caught under the umbrella of the Privacy Act, so that if those systems make a decision that has a significant impact on an individual, the consequences of not having governance around it means that there could be financial penalties, there could be reputational damage, and the third one is regulatory scrutiny. So it's all carrot. Gerry, on this one. So the organisations have to be ready. Now, if you can imagine how many companies right now are using recruitment systems that make choices about who to shortlist and who to reject and who to hire. Think about agents that are doing applications for loans. You know, you could exclude somebody or deny somebody credit application, and if that's incorrect and it's caused a material significant impact on that person, then you could be subject to those three issues.
Bruce, on that, like, like the credit practice, of course, just to maybe, again, I just think it's really useful to make it just instantly made me think of the case probably just ahead of when AI was beginning to bloom in the UK. Remember, there was a case where the private bank refused to offer banking facilities to Mr. Farage. The executives had decided
Oh,
it wasn't
yes,
kind
yeah.
of. So again, but this stuff was happening before AI was doing it.
Mm.
And given that so much of what AI does is informed by the thinking, the executive, the managerial, the ownership thought patterns that we feed into this is based on the stuff that we as humans do. Is it any surprise to come to square the circle to your point of earlier? It's going to do more of the same stuff, but quicker, deeper, and harder. So it's like if before AI, burst onto the scene, or as it has probably latterly and publicly, the same stuff about deciding not to give banking facilities or to profile somebody as a bad credit risk, that was disastrous for that bank. I think, was it, I won't say the name because I can't remember, but that private bank, I've got a name in mind, but I shan't go there. And what Farage was able to do in terms of profiling himself as a victim of this financial system that was prejudiced for all sorts of reasons, it's the same consequences that might arise, but it will happen to more people over a faster period of time, possibly.
Yeah. So we've got some stories now about AI and its impact on the economy and where things will go off the rails, and there'll be more of it. Absolutely, there'll be more cases where things go wrong over the next 12 months. So, what can you teach people about being ready for that inevitable crisis? So, how do you work with organisations to prepare for a crisis?
I suppose for us, Bruce, we're looking typically to work with, and we do work with transdisciplinary cross-disciplinary teams in an organisation. So when we run a simulation in the drill, our, our software portal, what we're looking to really do is, we've got all of the media channels and we've got the challenging content and the social channels. That's not really what we're doing. That's the kind of icing on the cream cake, right? It's or the birthday cake or the Black Forest Gatto, which is my particular favourite. Is we are looking to present a series of challenges where we test the quality of organisational decision making in responding to the risks presenting and threats arising. So we're looking to try and get organisations, because if we talk about, let's say we talk about AI, Bruce, I don't know how you've heard conversations. This isn't solely a technical issue. This isn't AI, not purely an IT issue, right? You've mentioned reputation. We talk about media. We talk about human resource practices. So basically what we're trying to do when we when we develop a scenario, and the drill's pretty flexible because we can custom design our crisis scenarios, unlike some other solutions which are a little bit more gamified. This is a cyber situation. This is a natural disaster. This is a media scandal. We kind of layer the challenges a little bit more realistically. But what we're looking to do is to get the organizations to look at the scenario, look at some of the assets or the threats, and we get them to try and triage the consequences. So we're getting them to think, what's likely to happen? So if we look at the case this week, Bruce, the case that caught my eye, I don't know if you saw it, Southampton Football Club in the UK have just been kicked out of the Championship playoffs, which would take them to the Premier League and a potential £200 million bounty. They got kicked out of the playoffs, so they can't get to the Premier League this year because an intern, one of the analytical interns, attended other teams' training, hid behind a tree with a mobile phone, and they thought he was live streaming training drills and formational practices back to company headquarters. So with that one, Bruce, you're talking about if that was a scenario that we are faced, how many disciplines should be involved in thinking about how to make this right? Should HR have a policy that says, no, you can't go and spy on other teams? Should the IT department or the governance team say, we can't go onto private grounds and film and then use the footage for our own tactical/commercial benefit? Find that a fascinating case that an analytical intern who was in his early 20s can be sent on a mission or endorsed to go on a mission to sneak into somebody's training, film drills and formational moves, live stream it back to HQ where the other analysts look at this and nobody thinks this might get us into trouble. So what we're looking to do in the drill is we're trying to get cross-disciplinary teams to look at a scenario and figure out what are the potential consequences. Therefore, what is the safest, surest, and most ethical way to respond to the risks presenting? We make them, they have to document it within the portal. And as they're documenting it and setting out what they think will make them safe, new pressures are cascading in because, as you know, a crisis usually doesn't arrive at 2:20 and disappear by 2:30. There are other things which arise, which are catalyzed, which are dominoed by this. So we get the organisation to try and document it. We get them to practice how they record threats so that they maintain crisis archives. And what ultimately we're trying to do, Bruce, is not get them to think how quickly could they issue a spin message to the media or get something out on Insta. It's important and it has its time, but we're looking for organisations to ensure that the behaviours that they undertake as a result of the AI problem arising or the AI consequences are correctly handled and managed. And that should be in line with governance standards, regulatory standards, ethical practices, respect for other stakeholders in the loop, and with a mind on what the media might do with the information and what your stakeholders will think. It's really about getting them to think about risk and talk about the behaviours and enact the actions that they're actually going to take to fix the problem. Because having a simulator that talks about, we prepared a message within, we got a really, really great message for social media and we uploaded that in 30 minutes. I'm saying, well, but what actions did you undertake to make good on the damage that's caused? So that's what we are trying to get them to think about, the consequences and the appropriate behaviours. And that's not necessarily a comms function, Bruce, of course. That's about your governance peers. That's about the board sanctioning it. That's about the CEO saying, this is a hard thing to do, but this is the right thing to do because we can fix it, because we ignited it or we deployed this. It's blown up in our face, therefore the right course of action. So crisis sims, as we see them, are about how does the organisation become aligned on their willingness and commitment to doing the right thing in the event of a disaster or an incident. Does that halfway answer it?
Yeah. If we're looking into the future and saying, well, what could possibly go wrong with this AI implementation to cause such a crisis? In some respects, 10 years ago, I would have said there's no way on this earth that a whole production database could get wiped out by anybody, let alone an AI tool. We don't even know what the tools are and what they're capable of doing in order to work out what the possibilities are that they could actually do in our organisations to create a crisis. So it's how do you work with somebody to envisage what that world might look like so that you can simulate a crisis that is somewhat realistic?
Yeah.
How does that work in your world?
Yeah, we had a situation, because it came to mind because somebody else asked about realism in simulations. We had a situation at the end of 2025 where we were running a sim, and one of the injects in the sim was the situation where a contractor to a government agency assaulted a staff member. Now, an alpha in the crisis room stood up, hands on hips. That couldn't happen here. That wouldn't happen. Well, the sim that we had developed was based on an incident which had happened in Sydney only months earlier. So when we look to develop simulation scenarios, Bruce, we've got the receipts. We base it on real life and we've got the receipts. For the incident that you're talking about, the 9-second database, it would not be the first time a database has been accidentally wiped. The thing that I think makes it even more scary and doesn't require much persuasion is the time that you've just quoted that it took. There have been incidents in the past. I'm sure anybody listening to this pod will say, I remember that case from over there. It's not that databases haven't been scrubbed, but when I said earlier, we're in the business of consequences. What would happen if half the database for a car hire firm was compromised for a half a day? It would still be pretty big, right? If they're a big international brand. So the fact that we keep the receipts, we usually develop scenarios which are based on real precedents that we've seen. And in that case, as I say, this would never happen. That's one of the things that we tested in the sim. Do you guys presume that you will know the nature of the threats that will hit you? Oh, we've all been around for a long, long time. But are you thinking from your own disciplinary awareness? Because we were able to say, well, this is what happened in Sydney, and it was a tradie, wasn't getting paid, and abused and assaulted a staff member who was a reception area worker. That to me doesn't seem a fantastical scenario, but the client thought that couldn't happen. It just couldn't happen. So I think that this is sometimes reflective of a failure of, I mean, I know the Scots are legendary pessimists, Bruce. I know that we've got this reputation of being dour and grumbly and grumpy, but we're lovable as well. So there's always that. But it's just, there's no end of bad stuff that can go down. And I think organizations are sometimes a little bit naive to think, oh, it could happen to that entity, but it wouldn't happen here. Why not? Like a car accident can happen to my neighbour, but it can also happen to me. And what you've just highlighted earlier in this chat for me, Bruce, is with the increased adoption, it's going to expose the vulnerabilities even more. And even with some of the more aggressive AI technologies, they're going to force this stuff out into the open. So how could anybody say, okay, but it probably won't do much against us? Every organisation has got skeletons in the closet. You've been around long enough to. I have chatted plenty, and we know this stuff. The question is, in Australia, Bruce, are our CEO and governance and board peers prepared to continue with this risk-taking / gambling mindset, which is, how bad might it be? Probably won't be us. I bet it doesn't happen to our organisation. Because that's the challenge, Bruce, isn't it? I mean, organisations thinking, we should really resource this, and thinking, we'll part resource it, or we'll give it to the comms team, or we'll let IT look after this, and it becomes another line item. But you've just predicted a fairly horrific in some
Well,
ways.
there'll be significant failures because
Yeah, you didn't say that.
I'm seeing, well, the reason for that is that here in Australia, we don't have mandated AI governance. We've got regulations around corporate law, around directors' duties. We've got regulations around cybersecurity. We've got regulations around privacy. But there's nothing that specifically speaks to AI. We've got some voluntary guardrails that people need to follow. So there's a fellow that I know pretty well. His name is Anthony Albanese. He's our current Prime Minister. And what I'm not seeing at the moment is regulation around AI governance. And because there is no regulation, people think that they can do whatever they like. And the guardrails won't be put in. They're running businesses, so we're trying to save money, we're trying to compete. So those priorities will become to the front, and governance and all the things I've talked about, poor process, poor data, aging systems, all that stuff's still there. But hey, let's put the shiny new AI on top, and we're away. I believe there'll be a lot more failures in AI, and that was what will trigger my good friend Anthony to extend the current mandate for AI governance, which is only applying to federal agencies at the moment. I believe that'll become more widespread. But until we've got regulation around it, Gerry, people don't know which direction to take or what governance they should be doing. That's what I'm hearing from the boards, is that you can't be half pregnant, right? Betting one way or the other. Do I put in ISO 42001, or do I follow the NIST framework? Do I follow the Australian government's new AI governance framework? So which one of those do I pick? What horse am I going to bet on? And so because of that uncertainty, they don't do anything. And that's going to be a real shame. But it might keep someone like yourself pretty busy. So what is it that when do people come to you, Gerry? Do you have, like, for instance, if someone's had a crisis and they haven't handled it well, is that how they get to you? How do they find out about you?
No, I think so. I guess I've been in this space, Bruce, of being. I have been a frontline, and I'm still a frontline advisor on live crisis issues. And where I would most commonly be contacted was when the in-house comms team were getting a fright and feeling the heat was rising, and they felt they needed a more senior or seasoned or grizzly or grumpy Scotsman to come in and be another voice as they were dealing with
Oh,
increased stakeholders through
oh,
the C-suite and the board. So typically, if I do a quick recall, I think it would be when organisations get a fright that this might be bigger than we've done before, and it would be good to get someone who's been over the course a few times to be a kind of supporting advocate in here. There are still organisations who have got pretty well developed risk registers, and they do run simulations annually, and they might pick an item which they feel has floated or to the top of the risk register in terms of its threat, its imminency, and they would want to run some kind of simulation based on we think this is a very likely occurrence fairly soon. So they would run it on that basis based on a risk threat that they've already identified. The number of organizations who want to debrief and rerun how they handled or mishandled an incident is in the minority, Bruce.
mm,
I think, and again, our old friend AI, I would think that that has got a very cheap and probably credible way of helping them decompress and debrief on what they did. I mean, organizations could put a case study of how they responded to an incident, and I think AI would give them some of the AI tools might give them a fairly decent critique of what they had done. So that's probably not a space that we're really looking or we see as an area of growth for what we're doing with the drill platform. I mean, for us at the moment, we've spent fairly significant resource in rebooting the system's capabilities. We probably didn't change the nav functionality of what we do. That we know that the training methodology that we've got built into the system is pretty robust. But what we did do was we changed some of the speed at which we're able to program and present the challenges that we would do as part of our scenarios. And we've also rebooted the system because we've actually, Bruce, we developed the first, what we think and pretty hasn't been contested as the first Arabic language simulator in the world. So
mm,
we can run crisis simulations in Arabic, and you'll appreciate that running simulations in English, the text runs from left to right, but we've built the capability now that the system's smart enough to change, and we can actually allow Arabic users. We've got representation now full time in the Middle East, and we thought that that was quite a significant market offering for the GCC region and beyond, where the reason behind that, Bruce, is we had a lot of practitioners saying, yeah, but we've got multilingual teams, and when we think of an incident or a threat, we don't always think in English. Some of them will think in their native language because you process threat and fear in your original
mm.
language, which for me is Scottish, as you can see, Bruce. I speak in English, but I think in Scottish.
Yes. Well, that actually brings you back to something I've been wanting to ask you is how did the drill originate? What was the spark that got you to build a software simulation tool to replicate a crisis in an organization?
Well, it's just thanks to clients, really. I'm not smart enough to think about myself, unfortunately, Bruce. We actually had there was a couple of pieces of client feedback. One client from the food industry. We'd been doing quite a lot of work around online issues management, online reputation management, online threats, and we were developing plans and strategies and playbooks for a client in the food industry. And the client said, these plans are really, really good. We're really confident in them, but how do we get to run through them? Because they didn't want to face a crisis, but they were saying it would be good to give a dry run to this kind of stuff. So that got us thinking about how do we give them the sense of pressure, decision making, challenges? How do we give them that in a realistic way? So that was one thing. And the other client was a government client who said, I've just sat in on a massive simulation exercise. It was phenomenally expensive for the department, and there was a cast of, hundreds on the agency provider side. Wouldn't it be possible to do something a little bit more lean and yet more realistic and impressive? And that set me off on a plan. So it was basically clients who. So I guess if I was being really commercially opportunistic, I would say it's a client-driven solution, Bruce. But that's where the Genesis came from, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I'm an entrepreneurial type of person.
Mm,
Always been entrepreneurial and creative in spirit. I'm not
mm,
saying that to big myself. I think it's just something I know
mm,
about myself.
yeah.
And it seemed as if there was an opportunity to do something in that space. But it definitely came from those two pieces of
Yeah.
insight
So,
from clients saying the plans are good, but how do we test them? And another one
yeah.
saying did one and it was fairly clunky and rubbish. Surely you could do something better.
So is it a little bit like when I was a kid, there used to be these books called Choose Your Own Adventure where you could get to a certain point in the story, and then if you go left, you go to page 43. If you go right, go to page 48. Is it a little bit like that? Is it, are you constantly feeding changes to
Yeah.
into the management team? So, hey, this crisis has now gone left. You now have to, you've got to deal with this over here. Is that how it kind of works? Take us through it.
It's pretty much layering the range of pressures which pull at or poke at the quality of decisions that are being taken. Because as you and I both know, when we're helping an organisation to manage an issue, the issue doesn't remain static. It's like as I say, it doesn't happen at 238 and finish at 240. There are a range of layered pressures accruing. So when we present information about a scenario in the drill portal, not everything is given because we're trying to say we don't know everything as soon as an incident. What we know is we're going to make you aware that there's an event, there are pains immediately presenting, but we kind of you know that there's going to be consequences arising from the pain. And part of the exercise over whether it's over 3 hours or 6 hours, we're trying to layer that stuff in so that some of the challenges are HR based, some are financial, some are regulatory, some are media, some are operational or contractual. That's another one. We talked about continuity. Can you actually service the contracts that you've agreed to? And we're looking to see whether those pressures, we need to get everybody talking about, hey, this is happening for us here. I think it impacts the way that we're responding to that pressure. How do we find that accommodation so that's beneficial, doesn't look self-serving? That's another thing that we make sure in the Sims that the organisation tends not to just spit out one-way messages looking as if we're doing everything we can and it was not our fault. And we test a little bit more deeply than that, Bruce. And what we also do is calibrate against some of the best practice standards for crisis practice as well. So that after a team has done a drill exercise, the rubric that we use to mark them is aligns with some of the key standards for crisis management so that we're not grading your team based on our opinion. Yeah, we thought you did okay. We're actually looking at the actual performative capabilities and saying to the organisation when we report back, look at that 4 hour sim, look at that 6 hour event. You had multiple opportunities to engage with stakeholders early and you were so focused on legal referrals and figuring out what could you say. Did you need to say anything that you didn't really engage with the stakeholders? Now that's a performative requirement for best practice in crisis. You engage with the stakeholders early. There was appropriate transparency. So we would say that by that marking rubric, you probably don't do that very well. So when we report back, it's a kind of graded report. And when the organisation gets that, they know that they're being tested to the kinds of capabilities that they should put in place. So we could say, you might want to put this capability, you might want to tighten up here, you might want to do this next time. So we give them feedback,
Mm.
which helps tighten up their plans, their governance protocols, etc.
Yeah, because when I teach the standard, one of the items I didn't mention was incident handling, and that is statement number 39 in the standard for those of you who are listening at home.
Standards
Um,
watchers, Bruce, you're thinking like a 32, 39.
so so what we teach though, and Jerry, this crosses over to you, is if there is an incident which is significant, we teach them to be prepared with a press release. We actually get them to prepare the email
Yeah.
and the press release as part of the training because there is nothing worse than deploying an AI system, and we all want a sunny day, right? We all want everything to work perfectly well the way we anticipated. But if things don't and you have a serious incident, you actually have to be prepared to communicate to the people who are depending on your system. So, to what extent do you go in your process around getting all the nuts and bolts ready,
Yeah.
not just doing the simulation, but all the things that they need to have ready in case there is an incident that's serious.
No, Bruce, it's very granular. In fact,
Mm.
what you're saying there about as we run a sim, we make sure that there are material content creation challenges for a number of different fiefdoms or disciplines within the crisis response team. So what that does, Bruce, is if we have to prepare a statement for the regulator, or someone has to prepare a one-page briefing paper for the board to let them know about the incident and the kind of key threats and actions, we actually expect that to be written because whilst there's a material requirement for that to be there by a certain time, new challenges are coming in, but if Bruce is focused on the AI part, we make Bruce write it in the portal. He's got
Mm.
to document it. Now, it's again, somebody else might say, Bruce, stop that because this other pressure's coming in. You're like, I'm trying to get this briefing thing done from a governance point of view. That's good, but because that's what it's like in that room.
Mm.
It's not, Bruce is away writing something. Don't interrupt him for 3 hours. No, he's the governance guy.
Yeah,
So
right.
we make sure that exactly as you do, it's not like we've had people talk about simulations, but it's a roundtable discussion. What would you do? We'd issue a media statement. Great, that's fantastic. What does that media statement look like? What's the
Mm.
language? What's the stakeholder focus? We make you write it in the portal and
Mm.
you actually write it into the portal. So then we can see how good are you doing this stuff. Now, some people might be tempted, get their, they're in our system, but they're also using AI what's the perfect statement for this? So we know that that's
Yeah,
happened. That will give them
yeah.
some comfort and support. It's the
Mm.
way the world is going, but yeah, we actually make material
Mm.
content creation requirements part of the Sims, so they feel. And we've also got a clock, as you know, Bruce. I showed you the tick down clock.
Yeah.
We give you the challenge if we gave you the challenge at 1:30 and it was a material briefing where you were asked to go back to the media by, let's say it was 2 p.m. and we're at 2:45 and you haven't even scratched yourself to start that statement, it's kind of interesting feedback. Do you not take
Mm.
that stakeholder seriously, or is this something that you don't want to touch? Or you were asked to prepare a notification for the HR team on how we tell staff about this breach, but you
Mm.
haven't done it yet. What's the thinking behind that? How does that fit into effective scenario management? How does that
So,
build resilience if you're not communicating?
so you're simulating, you're putting all this information into a portal. Does that portal generate a playbook for them, or does that a separate process for their crisis playbook? Because you won't be there when they have their crisis, right? You will be off
Depends
simulating somewhere else.
if they get a fright, but we create the simulations to test the performative requirements of key crisis standards. So that's
Yeah.
really useful for us because that tells us the types of injects that we might want to consider in any scenario. And that's a fully animated scenario over a number of hours, obviously. But that gives us the ability to evaluate and grade every team.
Mm.
So for us, that the clients get the measure of reassurance that they're actually facing a test that will say that these are the capabilities that you should be. This is how you should be thinking when a crisis hits. So
Okay.
so for us, that's really important and valuable. Probably something that we do a little
Mm.
bit more in depth than other offerings or players in
Yeah.
this space.
Yeah. So just a couple more to round out. I know a pilot that works for one of the major airlines in Australia.
Mhm.
Now, he has got a mandated number of hours every month that he has to go into the flight simulator. And so if he's flying or if he's not flying, he's in the simulator, right? And so as an organization, people change, people move on, and processes get dropped and things change. Is that something organizations need to have a recurring simulation to make sure whatever their management team looks like at the time, we're good to go?
I mean, I believe so. Unfortunately, Bruce, I think that the term running a simulation can mean so many things to so many different organizations. Think with flights, with aviation, they've long established what a simulator is. I think for us in the governance and reputation and issues and resilience space, what a simulator is doesn't look, it's not one of these
Mhm.
great rocking boxes that you maybe get to go into when you go to Disneyland or in the hangar up at Tullamarine. It's not
Hmm.
well defined. So we've got clients who say, "Oh, we did a simulation last year." And I say, "Oh, what platform did you use?" And they say, "No, we got some sandwiches in and we had a chat about some of the stuff that we thought was good." So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
term simulation is quite elastic. And I need to respect that because clearly there's an education piece that needs done. I mean, for us, a simulator is very interactive. It's very granular. It's demanding on you to commit interactive content to the portal. So it's really going to test. And we've had people come out of our simulation saying, "Oh, I actually feel a little bit stressed from that." Well, that's a great result. We had, and organisations still do simulations where somebody hands out bits of paper, every half an hour and says, "This is the new challenge." It was a simulation, but in this digital era of speed and realistic content, I'm just wondering, is that really the best methodology? It's not the best.
Well,
It's not the best methodology you could use. It's thematic. It's can certainly talk to principles, but it ain't building practical live publishing skills.
well, half your people will be working from home anyway. So wouldn't you,
Yeah.
depending on the industry, wouldn't you have to simulate that as well? Like, it's not a case where you can have everybody sitting around in a room pretending, this has happened.
Bruce, just that war
Yeah.
story on that one. A major simulation run 2 years ago for a major corporate, and we ran it in this really big hall. We had something like 36 disciplinary heads from across the organisation. It was a uni, and somebody said, "Oh, it's not realistic in real world that we would all be in the room at the one time." And somebody said, "Yeah, a couple of us work from home." I said, "Well, you could have dialed into the simulator because we've got remote dialing. You can participate." And somebody else said, "Well, we'd all be based in the crisis war room anyway." And the same person said, "Have we got a crisis war room?" Really interesting that a disciplinary head, had never been in the crisis war room, and the organisation didn't do it in the crisis war room for reasons we're still not sure.
Yeah. So, Gerry, I've got a question for you. You've created this business. You've worked with your clients to provide this service. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Based on what we've done more recently, or based on what I think would
What advice would you give to yourself when you were a teenager? What would you tell yourself?
believe in yourself.
Yeah.
Believe in yourself. I have to say, Bruce, I had a great, and this is answering that. I had a great chat to a pal. I'm in a band as well. I'm in a rock band. To be honest, it's a punk rock band.
You a drummer?
I'm not a drummer. As you can hear with these delicate vocals, I'm a fine chanteur. I'm not a bad singer. And
Yeah.
but we said, like, if we could have told our younger selves that we would be in a punk band at this vintage, riding motorbikes and still playing soccer, still playing football,
Yeah.
I would have thought, I don't know what the path that would have taken me to get here, but I would have been I think I would have been, as a teenager, I would have been really quite encouraged that would happen. I would say, I would counsel myself, Bruce, to keep playing soccer all the way, because trying to get back into it in my 50s has been an injury-riddled path. Everything from, Achilles to broken ribs. It's
a dangerous sport, that football.
a beautiful sport, and I hope to enjoy either an Australian or a Scottish victory at the upcoming World Cup, Bruce.
Well, we've got a couple more minutes. Let's have a bit more fun. Can you read that? Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So this is my other favorite book, apart from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So what your job in this is to pick a number between 1 and 150. So just pick any number you like.
Well, you said 42 earlier, so let's go with 42.
Okay, 42, which is the answer to the life, universe, and everything. Are you ready? So,
Yeah.
Gerry, perhaps our eyes need to be washed by our tears once in a while so that we can see life with a clearer view again.
That's quite beautiful. That's quite spiritual, quite prophetic.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think there's no shame in crying. I think there's, I think a little bit of pain, a little bit of tears can maybe wake us up and remind us what is really, really important. I'm getting to that age, Bruce, where people around me have got various forms of maladies, not all soccer inflicted. And, we realize that life is really, really precious. Life is really beautiful, can be. And anything, whether it's tears or pain or grief, that maybe reminds us of that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Gosh, you sound all typically Scottish and soppy, isn't it?
So how do people reach you, Gerry? If somebody wants to learn more about a simulator and through the drill, how do they find you?
Yeah, thedrill.com.au, or they can email me, Gerry with a G, Gerry at thedrill.com.au.
Yeah. And where do you play with your punk band?
Well, we've actually hit Cherry Bar a few times, but in the CBD, legendary rock and roll venue Cherry Bar.
The Cherry Bar, okay.
Yeah, we play a little place up in New South Wales a few times. It's kind of like a festival party up there. And yeah, sometimes on Bayside as well. So Bruce, I'll give you a hoy the next time we're strutting our stuff, and we're actually halfway good now, so that's good fun. It's really...
Thank you, Gerry. You've been listening to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, and we've had Gerry McCusker on talking about AI crisis simulations. So thank you again, Gerry, for participating today.
Many thanks, Bruce.
And I wish you all the best with the inevitable crises that we will be dealing with over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate it.